Tonight's case takes us north to Amsterdam, a city of calm canals, scrubbed brickwork, and a reputation for level-headed respectability. Poirot and Hastings arrive on what is meant to be a quiet holiday, only to hear of a young woman found drowned in the canal, dressed in her bridal gown, with the police already filing it neatly away as suicide. As they move between a rigid mother, a careful fiancé, respectable businessmen, and cautious authorities, Poirot begins to suspect that what the city calls a tragic choice may in fact be something much colder. A death arranged by people who all wanted the same outcome and agreed not to look too closely at how it was achieved. This is Poirot and the Silent Bride of Amsterdam, an original mystery written by us in homage to Agatha Christie, but entirely our own story with our own characters, twists, and solutions. Before we begin, we want to thank you once again for the way you've stood beside us these past weeks. The messages, the new faces joining us on Patreon, and those of you who have quietly supported us on Buy Me a Coffee have all helped us keep going. While YouTube has chosen not to restore our monetization, our escalation through the support team on X hasn't had the result we hoped for. And we now feel we may have reached the end of what we can do with YouTube itself. Knowing you're still here with us makes a real difference. If you feel like supporting us now that YouTube no longer pays to keep the lights on, you can join us on Patreon. It starts at $2.99 a month. On our Archive Society tier, we're now publishing monthly ebook collections of our stories, 10 mysteries with their illustrations, plus your name in the credits. That tier now has a 7-day free trial, which is a good way to grab our first EPUB with no obligation at all. You can also make a one-time donation on our Buy Me a Coffee page. Or if paid support isn't possible right now, you can listen to our stories for free on Rumble or Spotify, where plays still help us through ad revenue, in a way YouTube no longer does. All the links are in the description, so settle in, dim the lights, and let's follow Poirot along the canals of Amsterdam, where the water is quiet, the houses are proper, and a bride has been laid to rest by hands that claim to be innocent. Chapter 1. The Bride in the Water. Chapter 1. The Bride in the Water. I have long observed that cities, like people, cultivate reputations which are only partly deserved. Amsterdam, to the casual visitor, presents itself as orderly, tolerant, almost smugly reasonable, a place of neat facades, punctual trams, and waterways that appear to glide rather than flow. One imagines that nothing truly ugly could take root amid such calm. Poirot, of course, knew better. We had arrived in the city on what he termed a voyage de repos, a holiday prescribed by himself, after what he insisted had been a most exhausting surfeit of criminal stupidity in Brussels. I, for my part, was delighted by the prospect of museums, cafes, and the agreeable absence of corpses. Poirot assured me solemnly that corpses, like taxes, had a habit of appearing where least desired. It was on our third morning, as we sat at breakfast in the dining room of our modest but impeccably kept hotel near the Herraft, that the subject arose. Poirot was engaged in one of his more ceremonial meals, slicing a roll into mathematically equal portions, when he suddenly paused, head tilted, eyes narrowing beneath their domed lids. "Hastings," he said quietly, "tell me, when a young woman prepares herself for marriage, does she customarily choose that same moment to prepare for her death?" I looked up from my coffee. "I should think not." "Ah." Pooh nodded as though this settled some internal debate. "Then already we are in agreement." He reached across the table and tapped the folded newspaper beside my plate. I had scarcely glanced at it. Amsterdam's press struck me as sober to the point of dullness. "Read," Poirot instructed. The headline was modest enough. "Body of young woman recovered from canal. Suicide suspected." The article itself was brief. A woman, unnamed pending notification of family, had been recovered from the Prinsenraft during the early hours of the morning. She was identified as Miss Johanna de Vries, age 26, recently engaged to a shipping clerk. No signs of struggle. Verdict: suicide. What caught the eye? What had evidently caught Poirot lay buried in the final paragraph. The deceased was found wearing a white bridal gown. I read it twice. That is unusual, I admitted. Poirot's mustache gave a minute, expressive twitch. Unusual? No, mon ami. It is theatrical, and crime, Hastings, is rarely theatrical unless someone wishes to be observed. He leaned back, folding his hands upon his stomach. Consider a canal is cold, dark, indifferent. It does not flatter. It does not dramatize. Yet this woman dresses herself as for the altar. Why? Perhaps she wished to make a statement. I suggested a broken heart and all that. Pooh sighed gently. Always the heart, Hastings. You are faithful to it as a dog to its master. But let us use the head. The bride's dress is not for her. It is for the spectators. At that moment, as if summoned by the logic of his remark, the dining room door opened, and our hostess, Madame Van Dijk, entered, carrying a tray of correspondence. She placed a single envelope beside Poirot's plate. For you, monsieur, she said, her expression a shade graver than usual. A gentleman called earlier. He seemed distressed. Poirot examined the envelope. It bore his name in an unfamiliar but careful hand. Inside was a brief note written in Dutch but translated neatly beneath in French. A courtesy that suggested forethought rather than fluency. Miss Poirot, I'm told you are in Amsterdam. A young woman has died. The police say it is obvious. It is not. I beg you to come. Dr. William Costa. Poirot looked up at me. Finish your coffee, Hastings. Our holiday has concluded. Dr. Costa proved to be a man in his early 40s, with the stooped shoulders of one accustomed to bending over hospital beds. He received us that afternoon in a narrow consulting room overlooking the Single, its windows misted by the damp air drifting in from the canal below. You knew the deceased? Poirot asked after the preliminaries. I examined the body, Costa replied. Unofficially, she was brought to the morgue before dawn. The police surgeon was cursory. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And you are not a cursory man, doctor. Costa gave a thin smile. No, I am a careful one. Mr. Rees had no water in her lungs. I started. But that's Poirot held up a hand. You are certain? Within reasonable doubt, there were other signs too. Bruising, faint, but present. The kind that does not announce itself unless one looks. And the gown? Poirot asked. It was immaculate, Costa said slowly. Too immaculate. No tearing, no mud, as though she had not entered the water of her own accord. Poirot nodded, his eyes alight now with that familiar inward fire. Tell me of the engagement. Costa hesitated. It was complicated. There were disagreements between families, money, a business arrangement disguised as affection. And the fiancé. A respectable man, Costa said, which is to say a man with much to lose. We left him as the afternoon bells began to ring, their echoes drifting across the water. Outside, Poirot stopped at the edge of the canal and looked down into its opaque depths. A city that drowns its secrets, he murmured, and a bride placed gently among them. You think it murder, then? I asked. Poirot turned to me, his expression grave. No, Hastings. I think it is something worse. Worse than murder. Respectable murder, he said. The kind that smiles while it pushes. And with that he began to walk, already arranging the facts within his mind, while the canals of Amsterdam flowed on, silent witnesses to a truth they would not willingly surrender. Chapter 2. The House of Quiet Grief. Chapter 2. The House of Quiet Grief. If there is one thing I have learned in my association with Hercule Poirot, it is that grief, like guilt, seldom behaves as expected. Some weep extravagantly and mean nothing by it. Others maintain a dreadful composure that speaks louder than any sob. Poirot, who professes a dislike for emotional excess, is nonetheless drawn to it with the precision of a surgeon locating pain. It was therefore inevitable that our next call should be upon the family of the dead woman. The house of the DC family stood on a respectable street in the eastern quarter of the city, narrow, clean, and utterly devoid of character. Its brick facade was scrubbed to a dull uniformity, and the lace curtains at the windows were drawn with military neatness. Nothing here was permitted to protrude or confess. We were received by Mrs. de Vries, a woman of about 50 dressed in black, so severe it might have been her daily habit long before beraillement provided an excuse. Her face was pale, her mouth tight, her eyes dry. "My daughter is dead," she said before Poirot could introduce himself. "If you have come to sell condolences, I have no use for them." Poirot bowed slightly. "Madame, I have not come to sell anything. I have come to listen." She studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "Very well. You may listen." The sitting room was modest but carefully ordered. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece. Birthdays, outings to the seaside, a younger Johanna, smiling shilly beside her parents. Poirot examined them with quiet attention. "She was your only child?" he asked. "Yes, and her father gone 5 years now." Poirot inclined his head. "Then you were close." Mrs. Dare hesitated. "As close as one can be." It was not, I thought, an answer that suggested warmth. "She was engaged," Poirot said gently. A flicker crossed the woman's face, not sorrow but irritation. "Yes, you approved of the match." Mrs. Dare folded her hands tightly in her lap. "Approval is a luxury. Necessity is more reliable." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Then the marriage was necessary." "She was 26, Mrs. Dare said stiffly. "Not a child. People talk." "People always talk," Pooh replied. "But they do not always kill." The woman stiffened. "The police say it was suicide." "Yes," said Poirot softly. "The police say many things." There was a pause during which the ticking of a clock became almost intolerably loud. "At what hour did your daughter return home on the night she died?" Poirot asked. "She did not return." "Ah. She said she was going for a walk to clear her head." In her bridal gown, Mrs. Dare's composure cracked at last. She had been trying it on earlier. There were alterations to be made. Poirot nodded, and afterward she did not change. "Did you see her leave the house?" "No." "Did anyone?" "I was in my room." Poirot rose and walked slowly to the window, peering out at the street below. "And the gown," he said. "Was it purchased recently?" "Yes. Paid for in full. By whom? By her fiancé?" Pooh turned. "Generous." Mrs. Dare's lips tightened. "It was expected." "Of course," Poirot murmured. We took our leave shortly thereafter. As we stepped back onto the street, I could not restrain myself. "She didn't seem particularly distressed," I said. "No," Poirot agreed. "She seemed relieved." "Relieved that the story is finished," he said. "Or so she believes." Our next destination lay only a short walk away. The offices of Van Loan and Zon and Shipping, where the fiancé, Mr. Hendrik Vanlon, was employed. Vanlon was a tall, fair-haired man, of perhaps 30, with a neat mustache and the calm confidence of one accustomed to being trusted. He rose politely as we were shown into his office, his expression appropriately somber. "Miss Poirot," he said in careful French. "I am told you wish to speak with me, though I do not see how." Poirot raised her hand. "I will not take much of your time, monsieur. Grief is a jealous companion." Van Loan inclined his head. "Indeed, you were engaged to Miss Johanna Deere." "Yes. You loved her." There was the slightest hesitation, no more than the blink of an eye, before he replied. Of course. Poirot smiled faintly. Then perhaps you will help me understand something. Why was the wedding postponed? Van Loon frowned. Postponed from March to May. That was a practical matter. My position required financial assurances. Poirot finished. Dowry arrangements. Van Loon's jaw tightened. That is not uncommon. No, but it is uncomfortable. Silence again. You paid for the wedding dress, Poirot continued. A fine one. Van Loon nodded. Johanna wished it. And yet, Poirot said quietly, on the night she died, there was an argument. Van Loon's eyes snapped up. Who told you that? Amsterdam, Poirot replied serenely. It talks more than you think. Van Loon rose abruptly and went to the window. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled. She was emotional. She said foolish things such as that she would rather die than marry under conditions. Poirot leaned forward slightly. And what did you say? That she was being melodramatic. Pooh nodded. Men often say that sometimes they are wrong. Van Loon turned back, his expression hardening. Are you accusing me of something, monsieur? Poirot smiled, a small, almost pitying smile. No, I am accusing the truth of being inconvenient. That evening, as we walked along the canal, where Johanna's body had been found, the lamps casting trembling reflections upon the water, Poirot stopped abruptly. Look, he said. On the stone embankment, half hidden by shadow, was a faint scuff mark, not large but deliberate. A heel, Poirot said, dragged, not placed. You think she was brought here? I asked. I am certain she did not come willingly, Poirot replied. He straightened, drawing his coat about him. In this case, Hastings, everyone wished for the same ending. The mother, the fiancé, the police, even the city itself. A suicide is tidy. It asks no questions. And murder, I said. Murder asks many, Pooh replied. And I intend to hear every one of them. He gazed once more at the canal, its surface smooth, inscrutable, and unforgiving. The bride did not choose the water, he said softly. The water was chosen for her. And with that grim pronouncement, I knew that the matter was far from concluded, and that the quiet grief of respectable Amsterdam concealed a far darker design. Chapter 3. The Respectable Circle. Chapter 3. The Respectable Circle. If Amsterdam felt any shock at the death of Johanna Dice, it absorbed it with admirable efficiency. By the morning after our visit to her mother's house, the city had resumed its gentle rhythms. Barges glided beneath the bridges. Shopkeepers swept their thresholds. Respectability once again took its place like a well-polished piece of furniture. Poirot, I have learned, distrusts such tidiness. Observe, Hastings, he said as we walked along the Kaisers, how quickly a city agrees upon a conclusion. It is most efficient and most dangerous. You mean the suicide verdict? May we? Suicide asks nothing. It demands no explanations, disturbs no arrangements, offends no one of importance. He stopped briefly, adjusting his gloves with meticulous care. Therefore, we must look to those for whom disturbance would have been inconvenient. Our first visit that day was to Miss Elise Van Merton, whom Poirot had identified as Johanna's closest confidant. She lived alone in a narrow house overlooking a lesser canal, its waters darker and less ornamental than those of the grander rings. Miss Van Meren herself was a nervous creature, pale and finely strung with intelligent eyes that darted continually toward the window as though expecting interruption. She told me she was afraid, Miss Van Meren said almost at once, wringing her hands. Not of dying, of marrying. Poirot inclined his head. You draw the distinction very clearly, mademoiselle. She said the wedding no longer belonged to her. The girl continued that it had become something agreed upon by others, her mother, her fiancé, men from the shipping firm. Men, Poirot repeated. Yes, Mr. Vanlon's employers. They took a great interest in her conduct, in her reputation. Poirot seated himself carefully. Did Miss Dare ever speak of refusing the marriage? Miss Van Meren hesitated, then nodded. Yes. She said she would rather endure scandal than surrender herself. She even spoke of leaving Amsterdam for a time. And this decision, Poirot asked softly, did she share it with her mother? The hesitation lengthened. Yes, Miss Van Merton admitted. And after that she changed. How she became quieter, as though something had been settled without her. When we left, Poirot was silent for some minutes. A woman who intends suicide, he said at last, does not speak of escape. She speaks of endings. Our next call lay at Vanlon and Zonen shipping, though not to Hendrik Vanoon himself. Poirot had expressed a desire to meet Mr. Cornelius Block, senior partner of the firm, a man whose name recurred with remarkable frequency whenever finances were mentioned. Block proved to be a heavy-set gentleman in his late 50s, with a square beard and the air of one accustomed to being obeyed. He received us with formal politeness and no enthusiasm whatsoever. I fail to see, he said bluntly, how my firm concerns itself with a domestic tragedy. Poirot smiled. Marriage is rarely domestic, monsieur. It is economic. BL's eyes hardened. My clerk's private life is his own, until it affects his reliability, Poirot countered gently. Or his advancement. Block did not answer that. Poirot continued calmly. You required Mr. Vanlon to be married before granting him partnership. Block snorted. Stability is not an unreasonable expectation, nor is truth, Poirot replied. Did you know the marriage was in danger? There was a pause, brief but eloquent. Women become emotional, Block said at last. They require firmness. Sometimes, Poirot agreed, firmness becomes pressure. Block rose, signaling the interview's end. If you have accusations, monsieur, make them to the police. Not yet, Poirot said pleasantly. I am still listening. As evening drew in, Poirot insisted on one final walk, not to the Prince itself, but to the quieter canals that fed into it like veins. These smaller waters, he observed, are less theatrical, therefore more honest. We paused near a narrow stretch of canal, where the houses leaned close together, their reflections broken and distorted. Pooh studied the stones along the embankment, his gaze methodical, almost tender. You did not choose a public death, he said at last. If she had wished to make a statement, she would have done so loudly. No, she was brought to a place where silence was assured. You think this was planned? I asked. Poirot turned to me. Planned is too generous a word. Arranged is better. He straightened, his expression sharpening. In this case, Hastings, I begin to see the shape of the thing. Not a crime of passion, not even a crime of greed, but a crime of consensus. Consensus. When enough people desire the same outcome, he said quietly, responsibility dissolves. Each believes himself only assisting. No one believes he is killing. A trammel rang in the distance. Somewhere nearby a door closed, brisk and final. Poirot drew his coat more tightly about him. Tomorrow, he said, we must speak again to the doctor. A body tells the truth when people agree not to. He began to walk on, leaving me staring at the dark water. No longer merely a resting place for the dead, but a silent accomplice to the living. Chapter 4. Timetables and Silences. Chapter 4. Timetables and Silences. Poirot has a marked distrust of explanations that arrive too easily, but an even greater suspicion of those that arrive too neatly. On the morning following our inquiries among Johannes's acquaintances, he declared that we had spoken enough with people who felt things. Now, he said, consulting his pocket watch with exaggerated seriousness, we must speak with those who measure them. You mean? I asked. Time, Hastings. Everyone agrees about emotions. No one agrees about ours. Our first destination was not the morgue, nor the police, but a modest dressmaker's establishment on a side street near the Amstel. Poirot had learned its address from Mrs. Dyce with casual ease, asking as though merely interested in the quality of Amsterdam tailoring. Madame Reitfeld proved to be a brisk, energetic woman with pins perpetually clutched between her lips. She remembered Johanna at once. "A quiet girl," she said. "Very polite, very unhappy." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "On the day she last visited you?" "Yes, that afternoon with her mother." "At what hour?" Poirot asked. Madame Riedeld considered just after 4. "I remember because I had been waiting for a delivery that was late." "And how long did they stay?" "Perhaps half an hour. No more." "She tried on the gown." "Yes." "Did she admire herself?" The dressmaker hesitated. She looked at the mirror, but she did not smile. Poirot nodded, and afterward they left together. Calmly, perfectly calmly. Outside, I said, "That fits with what Mrs. Dare told us." Poirot smiled faintly. "It fits too well. We must see where it stops fitting." From there, we walked to the offices of a small notary whose name had emerged during Poirot's conversation with Mr. Bloch. The notary, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, was initially guarded, but Poirot's manner, differential, precise, utterly unthreatening, soon loosened his reserve. "There were documents," the man admitted. "Draft agreements, nothing improper. Merely practical," Poirot suggested. "Entirely. And were these documents signed?" "No." Poe inclined his head. "Then they were unfinished." The notary hesitated. "Mr. Weiss had reservations. Expressed when?" 2 days before her death." "And to whom?" "To me, and to her mother, I believe." That afternoon, Poirot asked me to accompany him on a most unusual errand, a journey by tram, following precisely the route Johanna would have taken had she walked from her home toward the prince. "We must test the story," he said, "not against truth, against probability." We timed the walk. We noted the foot traffic. We observed where a young woman in a white gown would have drawn attention, and where she would not. "She could not have gone unnoticed for long," I remarked. Poirot said nothing, but I saw him making quiet calculations. As dusk approached, we stood once more near the canal, though not at the precise point where the body had been recovered. "People imagine canals as convenient places," Poirot said at last. "But they are watched. Bargemen, residents, policemen. Someone sees something." "Yet no one reported seeing her," I said. "Just so." As darkness settled over the canals, Poirot suggested we return to the hotel by a longer route than usual. "Not for romance, Hastings," he said, anticipating my look. "For perspective." We crossed bridges at a leisurely pace, pausing now and then as Poirot examined the surroundings with that air of detached curiosity which so often concealed the most active thought. He asked no questions of passers-by, made no notes, and drew no conclusions aloud. Instead, he watched doorways, lamplight, the intervals between footsteps. At length, he stopped beside a quiet stretch of water narrower than the Princing and far less frequented. "Here," he said simply. "What about it?" I asked. Poirot did not answer at once. He leaned slightly over the stone embankment, peering down at the dark surface below. "This," he said at last, "is a place where one might pause without being remarked upon, where stopping would not attract curiosity, where assistance could be mistaken for familiarity." "You think she passed through somewhere like this?" "I think," replied carefully, "that if one wished to avoid witnesses, one would not choose the obvious route." We walked on. Back at the hotel, Poirot retired early, or so I assumed. It was some hours later that I woke and noticed the light still burning at the small table by the window. Poirot sat there fully dressed, his hat beside him, papers laid out in precise alignment. You are not asleep, I said. No, he replied mildly. I'm arranging facts, silences. He indicated the papers. One person speaks freely, another only when prompted. A third not at all. Each omission has its weight. And what do they amount to? I asked. Poirot smiled faintly. Not yet to knowledge, only to tension. He gathered the papers and placed them carefully back into his veil. There is someone in this affair, he continued, who has done exactly what was expected. No more, no less. That person believes himself entirely safe. And is he? Poirot reached up and extinguished the lamp. Not if expectation itself becomes suspicious, he said. Outside, a distant bell marked the hour with mechanical precision. The sound echoed faintly across the water, then dissolved into silence. I lay awake for some time afterward, thinking of the careful order of the city, of appointments kept, of duties fulfilled, and of how easily a life might disappear between them without causing the slightest disturbance. Chapter 5. The official version. Before we continue, a brief but important word from us. YouTube has fully demonetized Nocturnal Tales. Appeals and follow-ups have gone nowhere. Their final reply labels our channel as inauthentic content. They did not point to any specific video. Instead, they sent a generic list of examples of what they consider inauthentic. According to YouTube, that includes content that consists only of readings of material you did not originally create, such as text taken from websites or news feeds. Songs you did not create, modified only by changing pitch or speed. Highly repetitive content with minimal variation across videos. Mass-reduced content or content built on the same template again and again. Image slideshows or scrolling text with little or no narration, commentary, or educational value. That is the list we were given. We don't see how it applies to what we do. Fully written, original mystery stories researched and drafted one by one with unique narration, structure, and atmosphere in every episode. We've repeatedly asked YouTube to tell us which videos are supposedly in breach so we can adjust. They have refused to do so, and instead told us to change the channel and reapply in 90 days without explaining what needs changing. So, if you're wondering how these stories continue, the answer is simple. Direct listener support. We've moved the heart of Nocturnal Tales to Patreon. From a few euros a month, you help replace income YouTube has cut off. On our Archive Society tier, we publish a monthly ebook anthology. 10 carefully selected stories fully formatted and illustrated with patrons' names printed in the credits. There's a 7-day free trial if you want to see what it's like. If you're on Twitter, you can also help by tagging at Team YouTube and asking for a proper manual review of Nocturnal Tales, in your own words. There's also a petition linked in our descriptions. Signing helps, but please don't donate money on that page. That money goes to change.org, not to us. Other ways that still help: listening on Spotify or Rumble, sending a one-off tip via Buy Me a Coffee, or simply staying with us to the end of the stories. We'll keep writing and recording as long as we can afford to. Now, back to the story. Chapter 5. The official version. It was shortly after noon that Poirot announced with unusual decisiveness that the time for observation had passed. "We have been very polite, Hastings," he said, fastening his coat. "We have listened. We have watched. Now we must ask the city to answer us." "And how do you propose to do that?" I asked. "By speaking at last to the one man whose duty it is to prefer convenience over doubt." Thus it was that for the first time we presented ourselves at the offices of the Amsterdam police. A sober utilitarian building that appeared designed less for inquiry than for the filing away of conclusions. Inspector Peter Vermeyer received us with formal courtesy and visible restraint. He was a man of middle years, neat in appearance, with the cautious eyes of one accustomed to measuring not truth, but consequence. "Monsieur Poirot," he said after the introductions, "I am aware of your reputation. I had hoped in this instance it would not be required. Poirot smiled. So had I, Inspector. But hope, like suicide, is sometimes too convenient an explanation. Vermeer's expression tightened. The matter is settled. Marie took her own life. There is no evidence of force. No. Poirot agreed mildly. There is only an excess of agreement. Verrier gestured for us to sit. What is it you believe we have overlooked? Poirot did not answer at once. Instead, he produced his notebook and opened it with care. Tell me, Inspector, he said. At what hour was the body recovered? Just after 5 in the morning. And who made the report? A bargeman. And between midnight and 5D, Poirot continued. How many patrols passed the Princing? Verrier frowned. 2? Both on schedule? Yes. Neither reported anything unusual. No. Pooh nodded as though this confirmed something to his satisfaction. Now, he said, tell me, when a young woman enters a canal at night, what do you expect to find? Verrier hesitated. Disarray, panic, noise, perhaps. And witnesses, Poirot added softly. Ver said nothing. Poirot closed his notebook. There is something else, he went on. The dress. The bridal gown? Vermeer asked impatiently. It proves intent. On the contrary, Poirot replied. It proves preparation. The question is by whom? Vermeer shifted in his chair. The family identified the gown indeed immediately with admirable speed. You Chapter 6. The arrangement completed, find that suspicious? I find it efficient. Poirot rose and walked slowly to the window, looking out over the canal beyond. Inspector, he said, you have a city to protect. I understand that. But I ask you this. Has there been in the past week any report of a disturbance near the Princeton raft that did not reach your desk? They're stiffened. What do you mean? A complaint, a disagreement, a call that was smoothed away. There was a long pause. At 11:30, Veer said at last, a resident reported raised voices near one of the service alleys, and a domestic matter, a woman and 2 men. By the time an officer arrived, there was nothing to see. Poirot turned. A woman? Yes. The description was vague, but she was not alone. No. Poirot nodded gravely. And the alley. Verrier consulted a file reluctantly. It connects to the Princeton, a private access used by residents. Poirot thanked him and returned to his seat. One more thing, he said. Did Mr. de Vries leave her home carrying anything? Vermeer glanced at his notes. A small handbag. It was not recovered. Poirot's eyes flickered to mine just for an instant. That is all, Inspector, he said politely. Outside, I could scarcely contain myself. A woman and 2 men, a missing bag. That's Poirot raised a hand. It is a question, Hastings. Not yet an answer. Then who were the men? Men with reason to intervene, Poirot replied, not violently, respectably. We walked in silence for some distance. At last, I said, something concrete. Poirot nodded. Yes, the story has acquired a seam. And tomorrow? I asked. Poirot stopped and looked at me with an expression both grave and intent. Tomorrow, he said, we pull. He turned back toward the hotel, leaving me with the uneasy conviction that the calm which had so far enveloped the affair could not survive another day, and that the truth, when it emerged, would be neither simple nor solitary, but shared. Chapter 6. The arrangement completed. Poirot has often remarked that the truth, when it finally appears, rarely does so with drama. More often it arrives like a bill long overdue, unwelcome, undeniable, and addressed to everyone in the room. Inspector Vermeer agreed somewhat reluctantly to a final meeting. It took place not at police headquarters, but in the sitting room of the DC, a setting Poirot selected with deliberate care. Truth, he once told me, is best spoken where it was most carefully avoided. Present were Mrs. Dice, Hendrik Vanlon, Cornelius Block, Dr. Costa, Inspector Amir, and ourselves. The room, so immaculate on our first visit, now bore signs of strain. A chair stood slightly askew. The clock on the mantel had stopped. Poirot waited until we were seated. "Miss Madame," he began calmly, "we are not here to discuss suicide. That fiction has already served its purpose. We are here to discuss cooperation." Vanlon stiffened. Mrs. Dries stared fixedly at her hands. Poirot turned first to Inspector Vamir. "You informed me," he said, "of a report made at 11:30 on the night of Emmy's death. Raised voices. A woman and 2 men. No disturbance by the time your officer arrived." Vermeer nodded. "Yes." Poirot inclined his head. "Let us supply the missing names." He turned to Mrs. Dries. "Your daughter told you she intended to withdraw from the marriage." Mrs. Dare said nothing. She had already spoken to the notary. Poirot continued. "She was prepared to endure scandal rather than proceed." Vanlon made a sharp movement. "That is not." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, monsieur. You will have your turn." He resumed. "You fear disgrace," Poirot said to Mrs. Dare, "not merely social but financial. Your comfort depended upon the marriage proceeding." Mrs. Dare's lips trembled. "I only wanted to calm her." "Indeed," Poirot replied gently. "And so you gave her the tincture, enough to quiet her, not enough you believed to harm." Dr. Costa looked down. "But calm," Poirot continued, "became immobility, and immobility invited assistance." He turned to Hendrik Vanlon. "You argued with her that evening," Poirot said, "not violently, respectably. You told her she was being unreasonable." Vanlon's face flushed. "She was hysterical." "She was resolved," Poirot corrected, "and that was unacceptable." Poirot's gaze shifted to Cornelius Block. "You required a married clear," he said. "Stability, advancement, appearances." Block snorted. "I did not kill anyone." "No," Poirot agreed. "You did not. You attended to a problem." Block went pale. Pooh walked slowly to the window, then back again as though measuring the room. At 11:30, he said, "Johanna Dice was no longer fully conscious. 2 men assisted her from the house, one because he feared disgrace, the other because he feared delay. They chose a service alley, not the main street. Respectable men avoid attention." Epilogue. The Amsterdam Canal Bride, 1907. Vanlon spoke hoarsely. "We meant to frighten her, to bring her to her senses." Poirot nodded. "Yes, to show her the consequence of refusal in the canal." Inspector Amir asked quietly. "A place chosen," Poirot replied, "because it ends discussions." Silence fell. "The plan," Poirot continued, "required no violence, only neglect, the cold water, the delay, the certainty that no one would interfere." Mrs. Dare gave a low cry. "I did not know." Poirot turned to her. "You knew enough," he said, "and you did not ask." He picked up the stopped clock and set it gently upright. "The city helped you," he went on. "The police accepted what was easiest. The newspapers printed what was tidy. Each person played his part." "And the bride?" I asked softly. Poirot's expression softened. "She played none," he said. "That was the problem." Inspector Vamir stood slowly. "This is not a simple charge," he said. "There is no single hand." Poirot inclined his head. "Then do not look for one," he said. "Look for agreement." The inspector nodded grimly. As the others were led away, not dramatically, not violently, but with the subdued air of people whose certainty had finally deserted them, Poirot and I remained behind for a moment. Outside, the canal lay quiet, reflecting the morning light as it always had. "They will say it was an accident," I said, "or a tragic misunderstanding." Pooh adjusted his hat. "They may," he replied, "but they will no longer call it suicide." We walked away together, crossing the bridge without haste. Amsterdam will recover, I said. Of course, Poirot replied. Cities always do. He paused, then added quietly. But perhaps for a little while it will remember that respectability can be lethal, especially when everyone agrees. The bells began to ring across the water, marking the hour with impeccable precision. And somewhere beneath the calm surface of the canals, a truth long pressed down at last found room to rise. Epilogue. The Amsterdam Canal Bride, 1907. The case that inspired this story occurred in Amsterdam in 1907 and caused a quiet but lasting unease precisely because it resembled so closely the fiction authorities first preferred to accept. A young woman recently engaged, outwardly respectable, was found drowned in one of the city's canals. Like Johanna de Vries in our tale, she was dressed with conspicuous care, her clothing inappropriate for a nocturnal walk, and striking enough to invite interpretation. The initial conclusion was suicide. It was tidy, socially acceptable, and required no further disturbance. Yet doubts emerged almost at once. Medical examination raised questions about the manner of death. Witnesses reported movements and voices near the canal shortly before the drowning. There were inconsistencies in timelines in who had last seen the woman, and in how swiftly certain identifications were made. What appeared at first glance to be a solitary act began to look uncomfortably collective. The investigation that followed did not uncover a single dramatic villain. There was no masked attacker, no violent struggle in the moonlight. Instead, the case exposed a network of pressures, familial, financial, and reputational, exerted upon a woman whose personal wishes conflicted with what others deemed proper and necessary. Responsibility was diffuse. Intent was contested. Each participant could plausibly claim they had meant no harm. In the end, the case was not remembered for a decisive courtroom revelation, but for the unsettling realization that a death could occur without a clear murderer. Only a convergence of expectations, silences, and convenient assumptions. The canal, as ever, kept its calm. Contemporary newspapers remarked on the tragedy briefly, and then moved on. Amsterdam continued to present itself as orderly, reasonable, and humane. But the phrase "the canal bride" lingered, a reminder that beneath the city's composed surface, lives could be quietly steered toward outcomes they had never chosen. It is this quality, not brutality but consensus, that makes the Amsterdam Canal Bride case endure as a cautionary tale. Not of evil committed loudly, but of harm accomplished politely, with everyone doing what seemed at the time quite reasonable. History, like water, has a way of carrying such stories forward, even when the city would rather let them sink. Thank you for listening to Pooh and the Silent Bride of Amsterdam. If you're still here with us at the very end, you are exactly the listener we write these stories for. These long, slow burn mysteries take time, research, and a good amount of stubbornness to bring to life. And knowing that you stay with us all the way through is what makes it worth doing. You are the reason Nocturnal Tales exists at all. This case is a reminder that not all dangerous people shout or rage. Sometimes it's the quiet, respectable choices that do the damage. The mother who prefers silence, the fiancé who prefers convenience, the employer who prefers stability, and the system that prefers a tidy explanation over a difficult truth. In Amsterdam, the canal did not claim a life by chance. It simply received what a circle of people had already decided they were willing to let happen. To everyone who keeps coming back, who leaves a comment, who has joined us on Patreon, and those who have quietly supported us on Buy Me a Coffee, while YouTube refuses to change its decision. Thank you. It genuinely helps us carry on writing and recording these cases, one story at a time. If you'd like to support us further, Patreon starts at $2.99 US, and our Archive Society tier now includes monthly ebook collections with 10 stories, illustrations, and your name in the credits, plus a 7-day free trial, so you can download the first EPUB with no commitment. And if paying isn't an option right now, listening on Rumble or Spotify is a real help, because plays there still bring in ad revenue, in a way YouTube no longer does. Good night.